The completion of the current state capitol building meant that all of the agencies of the state of Arkansas that were housed there, all the constitutional officers particularly, moved to offices in the new state capitol. So this includes the governor, the secretary of state, the treasurer, land commissioner, and so forth. So here's the old State House building sitting vacant, a lot of square feet. It was reasonably close to the clinics of the city hospital, and students and faculty could conveniently walk back and forth between the two. So Smith almost, I guess we could say, occupied the old State House without having complete permission to do it. He was sort of an urban squatter for educational purposes. Smith occupied the place initially because he needed a space for a public health chemical laboratory to analyze samples sent in from around the state. And so if you look at the photograph that shows the two children sitting out front of the state capitol, look at that sign.
Yeah.
It is a great, one of my favorite photos. And it says, it's the home of the University of Arkansas Medical School, Pharmacy School, and Public Health Laboratories. Smith got that sign painted very quickly so that he could have a cert title at least to the building. After that, it was simply a matter over the summer before medical school started of getting in, partitioning off some of the space, such as the house chamber on the second floor of the old State House, so that it could have different laboratories. They had to install a pathology burner, a high-temperature furnace. They also fitted up the basement of the old state capitol and some of the outside yard with little wire cages so they could have experimental animals in there.
Right.
And the room, as you come in the front doors on the right, opposite the bookstore that has rotating exhibits in it, was the dean's office. To lecture, and then they would leave. And there was a library, a small medical library that fitted up in the place. So it was done in a matter of months and on a very small budget. But it worked, and through 1935, from 1911-12 until 1935, that was where the first 2 years of the curriculum were taught. You combine, young students, many of them teenagers, and alcohol, and being in the big city, and all kinds of things I'm certain occurred. One of my favorites was told me by Gilbert Dean, a physician here, Gilbert Dean Sr., who died just a year or so ago. And Dr. Dean's family were from here in Little Rock. He said every day when he was a medical student, he'd get on the trolley car to go home. And sometimes he'd go home at lunchtime and have a meal and come back. And he said he would get on the trolley car, and it happened to all of his friends when they go on the trolley cars. They'd be coming from the laboratories, and they'd be reeking of formaldehyde and other odors, and people on the bus would all move away from them, sort of like Arlo Guthrie on the Section 8 bench in Alice's Restaurant, I guess. But they get on the bus, and people would move away, or they'd indicate, you need to sit where the wind will, at the back where the wind will draft that smell out of the trolley. He remarked he got on the bus one time and saw the trolley and saw this very attractive young lady, and tried to strike up a conversation with her, and she just sort of held her nose. Ooh, you're one of those stinky medical students. That was the end of that. The students at that time had to prepare their own bodies for use in the gross anatomy lab, and there was a tank in the basement, now gone in the remodelings of the building, but unclaimed bodies of poor people, bodies of unidentified people, were placed in these tanks, and the medical students then would go down and lift off the cover and select their cadaver, and had to carry the cadaver up the steps and get into the anatomy lab and set things up. There were stories of people who, when they were taken down, the lid taken off the cadaver tank, that was their point at which they resigned from medical school. They didn't want to get their hands into that. They were, of course, right next door to the hotel, and they would occasionally call over and order Cokes, Coca-Colas, from the restaurant there in the hotel, and one of the bellmen would come over from the hotel with a tray and 6 or 8 Cokes, whatever, on it. and they would tell the person to bring those Cokes to a particular room. And, of course, it was the one on the east end of the building on the second floor that was the gross anatomy laboratory. And they would, medical students would get this person upstairs and say, oh, just come on in this room, we're in here. And he'd open the door and see all the cadavers and people working away and drop down the tray of Cokes and run from the building. I think it is important to look at the old State House itself as an artifact. Its construction, the different modifications that it's had over the years, it is remarkable that it's survived and still able to serve a public purpose. And I am convinced that the faculty and the students who used it, inhabited it for their 25 or so years, could indeed say it's to some extent their own memorial.
We'd like to send a special thanks to Dr. Jonathan Wolf from UMS for taking the time out to sit down and talk with us. This podcast can be found at iTunes or on our blog at oshmcollections.com. The Old State House Museum is a museum of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, and this podcast and the collections are funded in part by the Natural and Cultural Resources Council. Thank you for watching.